to you, O Christ.
During the first portion of my sermon today, I'd like to talk a little bit about a concept called ableism. Some of us might be familiar with this concept, and it is one of the words that we name in our welcome statement. In our welcome statement, we say, we are called to provide a safe space in the community as we break down the barriers of isolation. We understand that being truly welcoming involves actively working against, and then it lists a number of things. Some of those words being words that might be very familiar to us, like racism or sexism. A lot of us know what those words are about, but one of the words that's listed is ableism. And then it says that all of these forces seek to divide and oppress. This reading that we have today, along with many of our other readings in the Bible, use physical things as metaphors for the spiritual level. And so we talked last week about, or maybe in the weeks of Lent, we've been talking about food as a metaphor for the nourishment of the soul. And here, the scripture is using blindness, like the physical blindness, as a metaphor for a soul, a spiritual blindness. This can become very problematic when we try to say that physical blindness is a problem, that it is something that needs to be fixed and something that needs to be left behind and gone beyond. The spiritual blindness, perhaps, that is true. That is something that we want to leave behind, is that spiritual blindness, and seek deeper questions and seek a deeper spiritual kind of sight. But the metaphor gets problematic because we don't want to be living into ableism, which characterizes that ableism, if you want a definition, is something that characterizes people as they are defined by their disabilities and classifies people with various disabilities as being inferior. The idea that being blind is something that's a problem that needs to be fixed. And Jesus needed to heal the blind person of being blind, as opposed to blindness being part of the natural diversity of creation, that some people have sight and some people don't, and that is part of nature and part of who we are and part of the giftedness that we bring to community. We have a lot of metaphors in the Bible that we have to wrestle with, and that in our modern day we realize are not so helpful. I think this is one of them. I really like the way that our welcome statement connects to this reading, because it talks about breaking down the barriers of isolation, and it talks about ableism as being one of those barriers. And so one could argue that the real problem that is in need of healing in this story is perhaps not that the man is blind, but that the community pushes him out because of his blindness. He is considered a pariah. He is assumed to be sinful in some way. The community does not accept him, and he is socially isolated. And it's that social isolation that's a problem. That isolation is what is in need of healing. There's nothing wrong with this man. There's something wrong with the society that pushes him aside for being blind. Sometimes I think Jesus healed the wrong person in this story. And I wish that he had healed society's view instead, society's spiritual blindness, rather than this man's physical blindness. In the story, this blindness, this physical blindness is healed, and this man is brought back into community, and the community is trying to grapple with that and figure out how to welcome him back into community. And that bringing out of isolation, I believe that that is the healing work of Christ. That is the healing work of God, is to bring us all out of isolation into depth of community without having to change anything about who we are, without identifying anything about who we are as being a problem or something that needs to be fixed. In this story, the disciples and the Pharisees and the whole community ask a lot of really problematic questions. You have probably heard that there are no stupid questions. And that might be true, but I think there are really unhelpful questions. And there is just question after question, unhelpful question after unhelpful question in this reading. And I think what makes the questions so unhelpful is they come out of this deep-seated belief or bias that somebody did something wrong and that there's an order to how the world is supposed to work. And if everybody just did what they should do, there wouldn't be any problems. And because this blindness is a problem for our society because we have never figured out how to integrate people with this particular disability, it must be a problem, and somebody did something wrong. That mindset is really tempting. I'm hoping that most of us don't carry the theology at this point that if you are experiencing an illness or something bad happens in your life, I hope we no longer carry the theology that that's because God is punishing you for something. Some of us still were taught that growing up and are still needing to unlearn that. I'm hoping most of us are working on unlearning that and know that that is not the case, as is assumed by some of the folks in this reading. However, I do think a lot of us, especially including myself, tends to fall into the trap of thinking that there is a way things should be done, and if everybody just did what they should do, everything would go smoothly and there wouldn't be problems. And then when we have conflict or difficulty, we are quick to be like, well, who didn't do what they should have done, right? What should have happened so that this problem wouldn't be happening? And I am all about the practice of reflection and evaluating what has happened and thinking about what we could have done better. I'm all about that. I'm all about that kind of growth. But I don't think that that healthy kind of reflection for the sake of learning and growing as a community is what's going on here. This is more of a judgmental, self-protective thing. I need to feel safe. I need to know what went wrong to make sure my kids aren't going to be born blind. I need to not make the same mistake, right? It's a self-protection. It's not what could I actually learn? And maybe my assumptions about what is a problem and what isn't a problem are off. Maybe instead of asking, whose fault is it, we need to be asking, how can I learn? How can I heal? And how can I help this situation? There are so many situations in our modern day life that I wish we could bring more curiosity to. One thing I think about is my trans friends and neighbors and the way that so many people, when they learn about someone coming out as trans, so many people jump right to this technical, well, how did that happen? And how does it work? And did someone do something wrong? And often the parents feel like, did I do something wrong in raising this child in a certain way? Or did society do something wrong? Or was there some biological problem with our DNA that led to this? This assumption that it's a problem and that it needs to be fixed and we need to understand it and find a solution. I wonder if instead we could ask, wow, this really breaks my assumptions. This really challenges me in terms of how I thought the world was supposed to work. And instead of asking, whose fault is it? Or how did this happen? Or how does this work? We might ask, how can I learn? How can I practice healing? And how can I help? How can I stay in community? There's a poem about Jesus in an institution with mental health issues. And I know that a lot of folks, so many of us wrestle with mental health issues. Our children and our grandchildren do as well. This is another one of those that can often lead to blame. What did I do wrong as a parent? Or what am I doing wrong in my thinking that I feel this way all the time? This sense of whose fault is it, who is to blame, and how can we fix it, in that thinking that it's a problem that needs to be fixed. I invite you, as we seek this season, our season of seeking, to challenge yourself to ask more helpful questions in your seeking. I wonder if we have been writing questions up on the wondering walls, and I wonder if at this stage it's time to start questioning our questions. What if we take the questions that have risen up in us and we start asking questions about the questions we're asking? Are these helpful questions? What assumptions underlie the fact that I'm asking the questions that I'm asking? And it doesn't have to be bad assumptions. Perhaps there are beautiful values underlying the questions you're asking. But I think it's worth wondering about that. What is underneath the questions I am asking? What values am I bringing? What frameworks am I assuming when I ask the questions that I ask? The good news of the gospel that is shown in this story, I think, as well as in our day-to-day lives, is that Jesus meets us in whatever questions we are asking. Jesus comes to us and works towards healing for us, even if we are asking unhelpful questions. That's the good news. Jesus comes and meets us in whatever questions we are asking and helps us open that up, helps guide us into deeper, more helpful questions, questions that can help us connect with one another, rather than put up walls that disconnect us. Questions that can help bring us out of isolation. Questions that can work against the mindset of what is a problem that needs to be fixed, and instead open us up to figure out how to live together in community amidst the difference. Jesus meets us in all the questions, unhelpful or helpful, and helps bring us into community, gives us teachers to help us ask those more helpful questions. I invite you during our wondering time, we'll have 1 minute for you to do some wondering. You can ask some questions, and then you might even start to question your questions. What are the underlying assumptions that lead to this question? Is this a helpful question for me in my life right now? Or is this question leading to more closed-mindedness and more disconnection from my heart and from the hearts of my neighbor? We'll take 1 minute.